TTPs consider threats as a lesser matter to deal with and to treat with. But over the years, we have seen that threats, have escalated one and have become more serious.
Your address for sport.
Here comes Richards unfolding those long 400-meter on his legs, and he takes it by about half a meter. 14.82.
Your address for health and fitness.
You would think that men are the ones who are more at risk of blindness, but it's not. It's actually women. 65% of the world's severely impaired or blind population are women.
Your address for culture.
The love that I receive from everybody in Point Fortin, people I don't even know, and the way the celebration flow, I want us to continue to love our culture because this is something cultural.
Your address for weather.
Outlook for May and June calls for warmer than average temperatures both day and night. And according to the Met Service, there's a moderate chance, 65% for hot spells in May and June.
Talk City 91.1 FM. Your address for talk. Your address for talk. Your address for talk.
Thank you for the time. Welcome, everyone. This is the program Indaba, where knowledge grows. This program seeks to find consensus on issues which affect African lives here in Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean, and across the African diaspora. The program is hosted by the Emancipation Support Committee and is coming to you live from Talk City's studios here at 11A Maraval Road. We begin today's edition with Shabaka Kambon, Reverend Kwame Kamau, and I believe we have Rennie on as well. Let's bring them into studio. Everybody loving each other. Hello and good night to everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, good night, Karen.
Let's see
Loud
what
and
is
clear.
happening
Greetings,
over
greetings.
there. All right, I am not hearing you guys, so hold on one second.
Sure.
All right, I can hear you now. Yay!
All right, Karen. Yes, and so good night to our listeners on Talk City 91.1. As we welcome our radio listeners, we also welcome our listeners on the internet, on Emancipation Sport
Indeed.
Facebook page and YouTube channel. That, of course, would be listeners from across the region and indeed across the world. Welcome to another edition of Indaba, the place where knowledge grows, the place to find consensus. So tonight, we are looking at the book bans in the United States of America.
Powerful topic.
And of course, about approximately a quarter of the books banned, from my reading of it, have to do with the issue of race. They have to do with, or are written by authors of color, African American authors. And so we thought this is an important issue for us to address here in the Caribbean, because what starts there eventually comes here. So let me set the stage tonight. A book is a loaded gun in the house next door, warns a character in Fahrenheit 451. Ray Bradbury's dystopian vision of an America where books are considered so dangerous they must be incinerated. The novel appeared 70 years ago in the aftermath of Nazi book burnings and amid McCarthyism and Soviet ideological repression. But the urge to ban books has resurged with a vengeance. PEN America, which champions freedom of expression, tallied more than 2,500 cases in the last school year. These attempts are not merely more numerous, but are also broadening and deepening as time goes on. The decisions of school boards and districts are often vaguely worded, such as the Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' Stop Woke Act. At least 10 states have passed legislation limiting students' access already. Not all schools, but now, not only schools, but now community libraries are under scrutiny and attack as well. The efforts are also increasingly punitive. Threats to defund libraries, as in the case of a Michigan library which was completely defunded, threats of imprisonment and fines. These challenges are overwhelmingly from the right, and in fact, they have their genesis during the COVID period with parents who came together initially to do mask mandates, against mask mandates, then continued to work together and form themselves into these right-wing groups like Liberty, Moms for Liberty in the United States of America, which then went on to pursue, what they consider to be woke ideas. And while we in the racial justice movement, we have sought to remove certain titles from being mandatory in our children's classrooms, we have sought to encourage the school districts to find better material for our children. Um, this is a different thing. These parents don't merely want it so that their child should not have to read particular titles, but that no child should be able to access these titles unless they can buy them privately. So this is a whole new level. And as I say, one of the peoples whose books, one of the authors, thinkers, scholars whose books have been banned is a woman called Kimberly Crenshaw. In February, she gave an interview to Democracy Now!, Amy Goodman. We're going to listen to that now, and then Brother Kwame Kamau and I are going to engage in a discussion on the issues that they raise. And of course, we're going to try tonight to invite your calls on 91.1 Talk City in this segment. Renee, let's go with that interview with Kimberly Crenshaw.
DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show with pioneering legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw to talk about her work on intersectionality and critical race theory after the College Board removed her writings from the required curriculum for its AP African American Studies class. The College Board recently revised its curriculum for an advanced placement African American Studies course and removed Black Lives Matter, slavery, reparations, and queer theory as required topics, while adding a section on Black conservatism. The new curriculum was released on the first day of Black History Month and came after Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis vowed to ban the AP Black Studies class in Florida schools and Florida's education department because he said the course, quote, lacks educational value. DeSantis is expected to announce his plans to run for president in the coming months, and this all comes as teachers across the country face increasing concern about what they're allowed to include in their curriculum as Republicans use the culture wars to build their brand. They're not only concerned, teachers, about being criticized, but being imprisoned. On Friday, we spoke to two professors whose work has been removed from the new curriculum, E. Patrick Johnson and Kianga Yamada Taylor, who both teach at Northwestern, as well as to Harvard Kennedy School professor Khalil Gibran Muhammad. Today, we're joined by another one of the band. Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, leading scholar in the field of critical race theory, coined the term intersectionality to study the overlapping or intersecting social identities and systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination people experience. Executive Director of the African American Policy Forum, Professor of Law at both UCLA and Columbia University, joining us from New York after receiving the Winslow Medal from the Yale School of Public Health, the school's highest honor, which recognizes outstanding achievements in public health leadership, scholarship, or contribution to society. Congratulations, Professor Crenshaw, on that honor. And
thank you.
Some consider it honor now to be banned, though they're infuriated by it. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Now, to be clear, the College Board said they made this decision to, for example, exclude your work from the required course before DeSantis made this last statement a few weeks ago.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you, Amy. It's good to be back. You know, I think that the focus of the debate so far has perhaps directed the conversation by discussing whether the ban, or I would say benching, of some of our work from required text to optional text came at the behest of Governor DeSantis. The reality is that there's been anti-woke legislation since basically President Trump said, stand by, Proud Boys, I got something for you. And what he came up with was a ban on a whole range of racial justice and equity ideas and practices and policies. Now, that got rescinded as soon as President Biden took office, but then it became a state-based strategy. At this point, upwards of 42 states have considered banning a certain set of ideas, certain set of practices and concepts under the frame of anti-wokeness or anti-CRT. So, you know, it really doesn't matter much whether the College Board came to these decisions 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago. This conversation has been going on for nearly 2 years, if not more. You don't become a billion-dollar corporation by not paying attention to the market. And the market indicators told the College Board that this new course that they were hoping to promote, and interestingly enough, the opportunity for the course came after the George Floyd activation drove so many people in the streets, and they were demanding more information about structural racism, more information about intersectionality, more information about implicit bias. The same motivation that made people demand it also sparked a backlash in this legislation. So of course the College Board knew about it. Of course the College Board had to take some kind of awareness, and we don't have to speculate about it. They've effectively told us that. When the course was announced this summer, some of the advocates for the course went to great pains to say that this course was not CRT. The effort was to distinguish it as much as possible. In reality, what that was signaling was a softness in the resolve to step forward with the ideas that had been associated with CRT. That is structural racism, the movement for Black lives, intersectionality. So there was the opportunity, there was the motivation, and there was ultimately the content elimination, or I would just say benching of some of these ideas. That's what we should be talking about, not when the memo went out.
So, Professor Crenshaw, I wanted to quote the Pulitzer Prize-winning Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson, who wrote, "Educators must not allow the phrase critical race theory to be used to blacklist scholars the same way the word communist was used in the McCarthy era. Black history is our collective history as Americans. It must be told in full." And I think it's very interesting also, in light of today, to talk about the new McCarthy era, given the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy. But your thoughts?
Well, I was delighted to see that someone noticed this. As you know, Amy, I've been talking about this since 2020. I've been saying that the whole anti-CRT, anti-woke approach to legislation is a very old idea. It's basically an idea that says greater attention to equity, greater attention to equality, effectively amounts to reverse discrimination. It's anti-white. Now, this is a far-right talking point that wasn't often expressed in polite company until effectively Barack Obama was elected, and then President Trump, and now it's become mainstream. And the way that it has been made mainstream is by stoking fears about a set of ideas that most people couldn't tell you one thing about, except for the fact that they've been told to be afraid of these ideas, that it's taking something away from them, and they should repudiate it. That is a classic form of McCarthyism. And what makes it so disturbing is the fact that people who know better, people who know this history, were willing to sit it out, to think that it was going to go away when the conversation changed, or to think that they could outrun the shadow by simply saying, we don't do critical race theory, without paying attention to what the critics said critical race theory was, what they were going after. All of these ideas, but more importantly, Amy, they've said they're going after public education. They said they're going after university. So nobody can be surprised when suddenly this effort to stump out critical race theory turns out to be an effort to make anti-racism unspeakable, to make queer studies undoable, to make intersectionality one of the most widespread concepts across the disciplines, something that college-directed students cannot take, or can only take if the states allow them to. Anybody who's concerned about our democracy, anyone who's concerned about authoritarianism, has to wake up and pay attention to.
Wow, wow, powerful indeed. Can't wait to chew at the bits with regards to that.
Yeah, so brother, your initial response there.
Well, first of all, the very erudite professor of law, both UCLA and Columbia, how awesome is that? Um, Definitely did justice to the issue, which is to say, you are dealing with right talking points where people are simply parroting paranoia, the paranoia of their, as it were, charismatic heroes. Not that they understand what's going on, not that they can tell you anything about critical race theory, not that they really have to pay for out of pocket reparations when they are owed, or any kind of dismantling of structural racism. But because someone said it, that belongs to the Republican Party, of which I'm a part, then I have a solemn duty not only to share that information, but also to rally the troops within the mom and pop organizations to create a kind of organic groundswell. And I must say, while not a positive behavior in terms of why they are doing it, how they are going about this culture war is absolutely something that the African community needs to stop and pay some attention to. That
Well,
ability to engage in that kind of rallying of the troops
but Tommy,
and
let's deal with the why for a minute. Let's look at the why. Let's start there. I think you've raised that issue. Let's start there before we go into, because you are making a good point there that it's important to look at how they do things. But let's stop at the why for a minute. First, let's locate this in its proper place and time. It comes in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and the global reaction to structural racism and white supremacy. There was an international outcry in every country across the world. Millions of people participated, and and the epicenter of it was, of course, the United States of America, and that response that they saw, and of course, that response was multiracial.
absolutely.
And that response is what I think made people nervous and deeply concerned. And what we're seeing now is the response to that. So here's my theory on this. First of all, I think a lot of our scholars think that it's an attack on African Americans. It's something targeting African Americans, but it really isn't, in my opinion. It is targeting our history, yes, and we're going to talk about that in a second, because, or maybe we should just deal with it right away. The preferred narrative of race across all the post-slavery world, that is the Americas, not just the United States of America, but here in the Caribbean, Central America, South America, across the world, is one that minimizes the harm done to African people, overstates white virtue, and
Yeah.
insists that racism is a personal prejudice in the minds of misguided or amoral people, rather than a system that structures cultures and institutions. That's the preferred narrative. And I think, as I said, George Floyd, that incident, that shone a spotlight on structural racism and white supremacy like never before. The whole world started to pay attention. Countries like Wales, the UK, Australia, Belgium started to remove
Global
monuments
phenomena.
to their great icons of white supremacy in response to this the outrage that took place across the world. And this, as I said, is a response to that. But I think what concerns people like Ron DeSantis and his allies even more than our consciousness, because they don't really care about our consciousness. We are 20 something percent of the African American population. What the consciousness they're concerned about is the consciousness of their own people, of people racialized as white Americans. That is the consciousness that they're concerned about. They want to remove anything, any body of ideas that their children and their children's peers could stumble into that would make them part of any future demonstrations like the one we saw in the United States of America in 2020 and 2021. They want to reduce the amount of white people who are on the streets with African Americans and other people of color protesting that level of structural racism and injustice. And they want to blunt the ongoing efforts to turn that protest into concrete and substantial changes in law and policy and so on. So I think that's my perspective on that. Let me just open the phone lines, Reverend Kamal, 622-4911. Karen, we will take calls in this segment from our listeners. So that's my take on it, Reverend. What do you think?
I think it's erudite. I would add some things to it. Of course, to recapitulate succinctly, white burden depends to a great extent on black erasure. And so the idea that I am the hero riding into, as it were, the sunset to save African people from themselves because they are a primitive people, because they have not done anything for themselves, because they have not contributed anything to civilization. That's a very necessary component within the white burden ideology that says, I am a savior class coming to save Africans, save Indians, save Chinese, save Amerindians, save non-whites from themselves. So you really owe me a debt of gratitude for saving you. And you shouldn't be critical of me and my systems, no matter how oppressive they may be. The idea is that's really just growing pains. That's a side effect of the good medicine that is whiteness. So I think you put that really powerfully. And certainly when they are in schools and colleges where they can interact with information that goes against that narrative, it strikes certain amount of fear in them. But I think that in terms of placing it historically, a lot of that began not just within the Black Lives Matter movement, and at any point there's a caller, please feel free to stop us, Karen. But even during the presidential, as it were, tenure of Barack Obama, we began to see a certain kind of uneasiness among the white intelligentsia and within the white deep state, that here is a man of melanin, an Afro-American, who is in the White House, the most powerful seat on the planet, according to some. And so that was not a good look for white supremacy. And so that began to stir up certain levels of uneasiness. And so his erudition, his ability to solve economic problems didn't really help him, in the sense that it really made him a target. I think George Floyd was the icing on the cake in terms of taking it over the top for a number of persons, but it's definitely something within the modern era, that anti-black racism. It really began to show its ugly head during Barack Obama's tenure, but I think your synopsis is absolutely sound.
Yeah, I think one of the things there's a proposed bill in Connecticut. I'm not sure if it has been passed yet, which bans the teaching of divisive concepts or content that causes, and I'm reading here from the bill, any individual to feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of the individual's race or sex. It's really, really interesting language in this bill. So, as I say, it really seems to me to be aimed at DeSantis' own children and their peers. They don't want them to come into contact with this, what Fanon might have called potentially liberation information. And of course, as I said, only 1/4 of the books that are banned and the authors are African American and have to do with that boogeyman of critical race theory. The other issues are gender and um, uh, sexuality. Those are the other two issues, and I think they've combined all three now into a kind of grand grievance that's really interesting because it now gets you now have African people themselves, not just in the United States of America, but across the diaspora, who find some commonality on issues of gender or sexuality, joining the cause. So it's a so it becomes a even more complex issue. Where you would think that Africans would be united against this attack on the information on academics and the work that seeks to understand the oppression that we face. But we find ourselves divided based on the way that this whole issue is packaged. And I see it's 8:29. We have just about a minute, Brother Kamau. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I want to talk to the elephant in the room, or speak about the elephant in the room, which is white supremacy as occasioned by way of a pseudo conservative approach to race and religion that places both of those things within its idealism in a wide context. And so, as a result of that, there are those who are within the African American camp who fancy themselves conservatives. Remember, it's the one section of books that were not banned. Afro conservatism actually was a replacement for some of the books that were banned. And so, for as long as we are unable to put aside these labels that separate us for the greater good, of course, of African American and African progress, I don't think that we're going anywhere anytime soon. But that's probably a story for another day. How do we deal with dismantling this beast?
Yes, and of course, I want us to be very clear when we have these conversations here in Trinidad and Tobago that we are talking not just about what's happening in the United States of America, but what's happening here. We are a people in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, who are hell bent on not having honest conversations about our own past, our own racial white supremacist past, right? And that's something that and so we haven't even reached the point yet where our conservative forces would be fighting to remove books because there aren't enough books that have been published. We haven't the information has not filtered down into the society in such a way that it could have a transformative effect on our society, and
Agree more.
so we are way behind in this dialogue, and and we when we talk, and it's really tragic because this backlash is coming, and depending on how far it's able to go, it would have hit before we had a chance to benefit from the forward steps that were taken since 2020.
I absolutely concur. Last point I'll make on that is that people who pretend in the Caribbean, in America, or wherever else within the diaspora, or even on the continent, that we're in a post-racial world, I would want to say to them that we can't be in a post-racial world unless we are in a post-reparations world. And since we are far removed from being in a post-reparations world, the debt owed to Africans have not at all been paid. We can't talk about being post-racial because the harms, the trauma, the hurt, the ongoing, as it were, trauma, if it's not addressed, we can't just sweep things under a carpet, pretend that there's nothing to see here, and move on because of tokenism, because people like us are in power, people like us enjoy certain comforts, creature comforts of politics, of economics, and of social uplift. And so that is something I want to disabuse us of, this notion that we're in a post-racial world. That won't and can't happen unless we enter into a post-reparations world, and that reparations conversation is only now starting. You are muted. You are muted, Brother Shabaka.
There I am complimenting you on a great point there, Brother Kwame. And it's lost in time. But yes, indeed, I think on that there's so much more to talk about. I mean, when we talk about honest conversations on race, I was just pointing out before the program that just today I discovered that Ralph Abercrombie, who we have Abercrombie Street named after, his principal contribution to the Caribbean civilization is to come here in the 1790s to destroy militarily African people's attempts at revolutionary emancipation. And he succeeds in a number of areas. In Grenada, in St. Vincent. In St. Vincent, he kills the great Chief Joseph Chatouillet, who was the leader of what we call the Black Caribs or the Garifuna today. And he takes that sacred symbol of the Garifuna people back to the UK, and it's still there. In our office. They know exactly where it is. That's the sacred calabash of Joseph Chatouillet. He takes people from Grenada, rebels, our African ancestors who rebelled and who leaders of rebellion, back to the United Kingdom for trial. They are murdered there, and their remains are in a museum in Britain. And we honor this man with a street in Port of Spain. So we are part of that whole, denial of the racist white supremacist past, and we are living the consequences of it. But I see Renee has come. Welcome, Renee.
Hi, good night, everyone.
Greetings.
Tell us, Renee, where are we going from here?
Okay, so my name is Renee Francois. I'm one of the program officers at Emancipation Support Committee, and I am here today alongside Ulumbe Diaz from Egbe Omo Uni Isheshe Traditional African Association to talk to you about the Yoruba Village Drum Festival, which is scheduled to take place this Saturday. That's Saturday, the 17th of June from 2 p.m. It is hosted by the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago, and it's one of the major events of the Pan-African Festival commemorating emancipation. The event is free to the public, and this year I'm very excited because we are expecting roughly 16 to 18 drumming groups from across Trinidad. We're not fortunate this year to have any drumming groups from Tobago, but we'll keep trying. As I'm sitting right here speaking with you, presently I'm actually hearing a group performing, and I suspect it might be Dagoville drummers who are also expected to perform on Saturday. So
Awesome.
I'm feeling the vibes from all now. Definitely ready. We want to encourage the public to, of course, come out. It's a really good event to bring your entire family to. It's children friendly. We're going to have, some soup and juice on sale, so you can also come and patronize some of the vendors there. But it's just a really um, nice, wholesome event to have. Um, this year would also be the second year that we have the monument, Yoruba Village Monument in the square with us.
Yes.
It was erected last year. It's a monument that was commissioned by the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. It was designed by Shilan Peters, and then she, along with Maria Diaz, made the structure happen. Um, we at ESC are very grateful for all the assistance to the East Port of Spain Development Company as well as the Port of Spain Corporation. Um, and I also want to mention every year, as part of the Yoruba Village Drum Festival, we honor people within the community because we understand that Yoruba Village, what we know as Laventil, Mova, Bitam, this East Port of Spain area is an area community imbued with positivity and greatness. I mean, out of this community, we have Kwame Ture, this amazing civil rights activist who was born on Oxford Street, right there, that we're, fingers crossed, hoping to rename after him. Um, so, in recognizing that greatness, we give out the Keeper of the Tradition Award. And this year, the award would go to Miss Christine Duncan Mark. She's the leader of the Belmont Freetown Arts and Cultural Performing Company. She has been doing amazing work in her community for years. They are, mainstays of the Prime Minister's Best Village competition. They tend to place in the top 5. They're just all around really excellent performers. And under Miss Christine's leadership, they have been able to accomplish a lot. And she continues to invest in the community. Not forgetting the young ones, we also.
Rennie, don't forget Ulombe is here. Let's bring
Yes,
you in.
no. That's now Olube is going to be able to talk about his group. I just want to mention that we also give awards to young people in tribute to the UN Day of the African Child. And this year, the 2 awardees are from Mobile Laventil Secondary School. And we just want to encourage everyone to come out, celebrate with us, begin to get an emancipation spirit, and just join us for the rest of the festival. So Michael, I hope I didn't take up too much of your time. Over to you.
Hi, good afternoon all. Just confirm if you all are hearing me.
Yes, loud and clear, brother.
Right. My name is Olumbe Diaz, the founder and manager of Egbe Omoni Sheshe Traditional African Association. It's a Yoruba-based group of musicians from South Trinidad. Actually, we have members throughout Trinidad and Tobago. This would be our 7th or 8th year performing in the Yoruba Village Drum Festival. Just confirm that. So my eldest son is 9 years, and his first performance with us on stage was at 2 years of age. So yeah, I say roughly 7 or 8 years we have been part of this production by the Emancipation Support Committee. My experience over the years, or the group's experience, it has been tremendous, being able to perform with so many other multi-talented groups of dancers, drummers, other musicians, panists, tambu bamboo, rapso artists, you name it. Within our tradition, they actually perform at the Yoruba Village. And over the years, the festival has grown. We actually, as Renee would have mentioned, we usually start with a little walk around the block with all the drumming groups there, where we commemorate the freedom of those who would have settled initially in Yoruba Village.
Yes, sir.
Right? And we continue every year to really level up, as we would say, on the performances of the drummers, of all the artists. I just want to shout out all the groups, not only those who would be performing this year, but all the groups who would have performed in past years as well.
Sure.
A lot of it brings out a lot of the young talented drummers, some of the dancers and those who participate in Best Village as well. This is a stage where that performance actually comes out, even before the Best Village competition, even before the emancipation season. So it's a great opportunity again to be part of the Yoruba Village Drum Festival, the annual drum festival. We Egbe Omoni Sheshe will be there as usual to make our contribution count. And
yes, sir.
Brother, before you go, you gotta tell us your drumming style. What is your unique contribution here?
So our unique contribution is Orisha drumming. So that would be those types of drums and that type of music is more or less utilizing the sacred spaces of Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay,
It's
so what we're
indigenous.
talking about here, then we're talking about Rada drums with the
So
Nigerian tradition.
it's not Rada drums, right? It's more Bembe under the Ifa Orisha community. The Rada drums will come under the Rada community. The
Okay,
Arada.
but there's a, in Trinidad we have a very unique a way of expressing that particular tradition in drums, where we have three drums of different
Yes,
sizes,
right.
right? And that's not the way they do it in Nigeria.
No, they don't.
That's not the way they do it in IFA.
Yeah, so that's why I say it's actually indigenous to us here in Trinidad and Tobago.
That's right.
We know the source of the drum, meaning it's actually called a Bembe drum, which is dedicated to one particular deity called Oshun in Yoruba land. The construction, that's based on the construction. In terms of the names, they have maintained the names from those areas such as Ibadan and Oyo, which would have been controlled by the deity called Shango. We usually hear that Trinidad is so-called Shango Nation, right? And the names of the drums are actually retained from Shango's set of drums, but in terms of construction, they are Oshun's drum. Very unique.
I mean, the details we're gonna have to get into in terms of time another day. But the facts are, and it's good. Congratulations, you're very clear on this. We do have a very unique tradition. So people come from all over the world to participate in our traditions, the traditions that our ancestors have preserved and collected and collated here.
Correct. Yes.
And you're gonna get a chance, if you have the time and the energy, to go down to that drum festival to see that tradition live, that unique tradition nowhere else.
What time does it kick off? What time does it kick off? Give us that time, give us that date again, call out the masses. And while you're at it, last question to you, and I know you're running out of time, but this is Indaba. With regards to the drum, we know it has been persecuted, has been prosecuted at one point in time, outlawed, banned in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
To think that people were arrested, to think that people lost their lives over this sacred instrument. One would believe that it would have been erased. We were talking about black erasure in the American context a little while ago. Had the colonial powers had their way, drumming and of course even tambu bambu and limbo and all of these traditions that we take for granted would have been erased. How does it feel to be part of the retainance of such an important cultural memory? You have 60 seconds.
The feeling is honestly out of this world. Reason being, we are actually contributing to cultural preservation and also bringing it out into the public. As I said, for example, these types of drums are usually played in the sacred spaces of Trinidad and Tobago. Having this type of music being played, publicly, so that it would be accepted. Think about it. Any drum you play, it doesn't matter your race, your way of life, your foot will start to tap. Your head will start to nod just to be in time. And that is the vibration of our African goat skin. And that is what allows us to maintain that frequency that will propagate unity, not only within the traditions, but also among the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, and quickly, let me just point out a challenge to you, my brothers. Can anybody tell me what year the law banning drumming was rescinded? Anybody? Okay, so that's going to be our challenge before the end of Indaba tonight.
Yep, we're gonna have to Google that. You're gonna have to Google that.
It's gonna shock you. It is far more recent than you would think. Thank you, Brother Olimbe.
No problem. Take care. So it's on the Saturday the 17th at 2 p.m. kickoff time.
Nice. This Saturday, 2 p.m. Yoruba Village, Independence Square, Trinidad and Tobago. Awesome.
Next to the Grand Monument. Take care, brother.
Take care.
Salute.
Yeah. Over to you, Reverend Kamal.
Okay, so if you'd like to stick around, I was just about to say to the brother, if he'd like to stick around, he can, as we segue into the French side of things. There's a very, very popular WhatsApp video. I'm sure if one were to do some type of digital analysis, that video would have, over 10 million views very, very easily. This video purports to be, as it were, a translation of a UN speech that was done by the French president in Emmanuel Macron, of course, at the United Nations on the 30th of April, 2023. I'm here, of course, to burst the bubble of all of those amazing Pan-Africanists who have believed that this awesome, genius piece of satire was in fact reality. It was truth. And so it's not to be taken literally. It's not fact. It's not truth. We're going to get a little sampling, a little snippet of it coming up by way, of course, of Queen Sister Renee. But let me just preface it. He's laying waste the French past, calling African nations, every one of the 14 Francophone nations, one at a time. And he's going into a real in-depth analysis of the French atrocities that were done in those nations. And then he ends by way of talking about the way forward and what France can do to atone. It's a real sad day in history when fake news is the best news out of the France the French diplomatic as it were quarters. So when the fake news is better than the actual news, it's a sad day in history. But we're gonna call on Rennie now to do justice and to play just a snippet, just 2.5 minutes or so of the latter end of this video, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. Over to you, Rennie.
Some of the natural resources we stole includes gold, diamonds, oil, timber, and minerals. Some of the cultural artifacts we stole includes precious art, sculptures, and manuscripts. We also seized vast amounts of land, displacing local populations and disrupting traditional ways of life. As for human labor, we forcibly brought millions of Africans to work as slaves in French colonies for agriculture and mining. While it is difficult to provide an exact dollar figure we gained from colonizing Africa, some estimates suggest that it's in the range of hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars. For example, in 2008, the French economist Jacques Marseille estimated that France's colonial empire in Africa had generated a total net profit of $210 billion between 1880 and 1960. Another estimate, by the Senegalese economist Ndongo Samba Sylla in 2018, suggested that we could owe as much as $17 trillion. You can argue each estimate may be biased. However, if we take the average of these two estimates, we would arrive at a figure of approximately $8.6 trillion. While no accurate value can be placed on human life and suffering, we believe that this should be the minimum figure to begin reparation negotiations with. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate paying reparations to each African country that was colonized is a fair action to apologize for what our country did and support their economic development. It should start by engaging in open and constructive dialogue with the affected nations to ensure that the reparations and development efforts are implemented effectively and sustainably. I thank you.
Yeah, so there we go. with regards to it. Now, again, just to put things in context for those who may be unaware, perhaps you're new to Indaba. The Indaba loyalists have known for quite a while now, based on the awesome work of Brother Shabaka and our very illustrious and esteemed historical professor, Dr. Claudius Fergus, all of the French atrocities that have happened in Africa and outside of Africa. But I am going to identify 11. I'm going to just very speedily identify 11 things that are part of an ongoing crime scene. So we are not just talking about past acts of aggression and hostilities against Africans and African people. We are talking about an ongoing process of genocide, certainly an ongoing process of economic devastation within Africa. I want to be very, very quick, very speedy in relation to this delivery. Point number one: the colonial debt for the benefits of France colonization. So there is, as it were, right now in Africa, the reality that African nations have to pay France for all of the French so-called development that took place in Africa during the times of slavery and colonization. And so that debt is in the tune of billions, some would argue trillions, and that debt needs, of course, by way of reparations, to be cancelled. But France has not cancelled that. They continue to tax African nations every year by way of saying, I built monuments while I was raping and plundering and stealing all of your resources and people. And so you have to pay me, as it were, for those things that I created, anything that I did. Point number two: automatic confiscation of national reserves. And so African countries should deposit their national monetary reserves in French banks as an absolute mandate. Point number three: right of first refusal on any raw material or natural resources discovered in a former French colony. Gold, diamond, bauxite, coltan, whatever is discovered, France has the first right of refusal. Number four: priority to French interests and companies in public procurement and public bidding. Of course, our brother Ashwell Raymond, who was here only a week or two or so ago, would have a mental explosion to think that France wants, from a procurement perspective, to be at the front of the line in relation to all public bidding. Five: exclusive right to supply military equipment and to train the country's military officers. Now, this so-called training that is taking place really belies a more notorious agenda of the 67 coups that were recorded in Africa at the time of my study and research going into this. Some a very large percentage of those were actually perpetuated by generals who and military officers who, having studied within French academies, turned their studies and knowledge of war against the very governments that they had sworn to protect and serve. Believe and do with that whatever you would like in relation to same. We move on to, of course, 6, right for France to pre-deploy troops and intervene militarily in the country to defend its interests. What is its interest? The monies, the resources it continues to rape and plunder out of Africa. 7, obligation to make French the official language, the lingua franca of the country, and the language for education. So we were talking about dystopic experiences in the education system in the West here. In Africa, some 14 nations have to call French their main language, official language. Number 8, obligation to use France and, of course, its colonial money as part and parcel of a continued French domination of the economy. Now, some 8 nations have come together to form, of course, the ECOWAS group, saying that we are going to create our own currency, but the debt is still owned, of course, from a French perspective. So whatever they call their currency, the debt is still owned in francs. 9, obligation to send France annual balance and reserve reports. So you have to report on your spendings and your economy to France every year. 10, coming down penultimately, renunciation to enter into military alliance with any other country unless authorized by France, even if it's in that African nation's best interest. And last but not least, 11, obligation to ally with France, as it were, in the situations of war and global crisis, including things, of course, like the pandemic and other things of that nature. 11 dystopic active crime scenes taking place in Africa as we speak. We are not just talking about slavery and colonialism that ended in 1960. We are talking about present day aggressions, hostilities, violations, trauma, and perpetuations of economic and some would argue actual genocide and ecocide in Africa. Brother Shabaka, I know you're anxious to jump in. Talk to me about your take on French aggression and hostilities in Africa and what is really owed. A number was thrown out, 8.6 trillion, the middle way between, as it were, Jacques Marseille and that of the Senegalese economist who said 17 billion. Jacques Marseille said 210 billion. So they found a middle ground of some 8.6 billion. Do you agree with that amount? Do you think more is owed? Give us some other interesting Shabaka points in relation to
Well,
this.
I think that when you first come upon the information that you have just shared there, and that is news to many people, that France is overseeing the running of so many of its former colonies on the continent of Africa in such a repressive way that makes a mockery of any form of sovereignty at all. It's very disturbing, very, very disturbing. And I would advise anybody who is hearing this for the first time to go back and try to listen again to the 11 points you shared, because it's a lot of information to take in. And cumulatively, as I said, it is very disturbing. But we have 2 minutes, Kwame, before we lose our listeners on 91.1. And before we continue our discussion, let me just say that the act the year was 2000. That's the year that the laws that prohibited
Embarrassing.
the banning of the big drums, those laws started in the 80s.
Abysmal.
There were laws starting in the 1880s that attacked African culture and going right up to 1921. And that package of laws that remained on the books was finally removed in 2000 in Act 85 of 2000 under the UNC government. Very interesting. These are the facts. So let me just share that, and then let's for our listeners on 91.1 who may have to leave us shortly. Those of you who will leave it on 91.1. We want to bid you farewell and invite you to join us again next week Wednesday for another edition of Indaba. If you do have the capacity to do so, tune in right now to the Emancipation Support Committee's Facebook page and hear the rest of Indaba over time. So basically, France sort of has distinguished itself in the post-colonial period in terms of how it's dealt with its former colonies, not just on the continent, but right here in the Caribbean. We have Martinique and Guadeloupe seeking independence up to today, and having a difficult time in doing so. We also recall that in 2000, when all the monuments were coming down. We talked about George Floyd's murder and the aftermath in tonight's program. Macron, you had the leaders of Belgium, including the descendants of King Leopold, calling for his monuments to be removed. You had in the United States of America the descendants of Confederate generals like Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, calling for their monuments to be removed. And so many monuments being removed officially, not just the ones that were taken down by the activists all across the world. But Macron in France was the one president who said no monuments will be removed in France. And of course, the day after he said that, our brothers and sisters in Martinique removed several monuments, and they continue to do that for some time. So they started with the Shropshire monuments, which was
Fabulous.
kind of unfortunate because Shropshire was an abolitionist, but he was. They understood the context in which he was being used in Martinique, and then of course they went on to Napoleon's wife Josephine, who came from a slave owning family in Martinique, and then of course to Desnambuc, who was the Columbus, if you will, of the French territories. He went there and decimated the indigenous people in the way that Columbus did, initiated the program of violence there. So, so France seems to want to occupy, despite what they're doing in terms of aid and so on, because there's another side. France has another side to it, perhaps based on some fragment of what they're taking. um, they despite that, they seem to be one of the most hardcore colonial powers, or post-colonial powers to have to deal with. One of the most repressive. That's based on the facts that we have just gone through.
Sure. I wanna just add this in closing. Haiti, we can't leave Haiti out of the conversation at all on tonight. Rastafari would correct me and say Truversation, and they would be correct in so doing. Some 21 billion, as it were, US dollars were extracted from Haiti between 1804 and 19, as it were, 47. So for basically 150 years, French, as it were, slavers wanting compensation for their loss of, in quotes, property, would have placed this very undue burden on Haiti, crippling its development, crippling, as it were, its progress, crippling its forward steps. If that was all that they did, it would have been bad enough. But over the years, not only France, but other Western nations and former colonial and imperial oppressors would have joined with France to engage in one dystopic act after the other in Haiti to suppress the people. We have seen all kinds of rape of resources in Haiti. We've seen rape of people in Haiti as a result of European aggression. We've seen true UN peacekeeping troops, in air quotes, cholera being widely distributed and spread throughout Haiti as a result of very unhygienic practices and standards. One would even argue perhaps it may have even been purposeful. Some reports do claim that it's purposeful. And of course, regime change after regime change, every president, every prime minister that does not agree with, of course, the talking points of France and the colonial authorities are removed, as it were, from office. And we've seen within the last 2 years the assassination of a sitting president in Haiti, again, as a result of the hand of external forces. So again, we are not looking at something that is way past. France brought an end to slavery in, I think it's 1848 thereabout, and so we are not talking about some far distant, removed atrocity. We are talking about present day atrocities. I want to end on a positive note, though, because CARICOM has put together an envoy, a group of eminent persons, 3 former prime ministers of the CARICOM region, to oversee, as it were, a process where Haitian stakeholders are meeting in Jamaica. As a matter of fact, they met in Jamaica from the 11th of June to the 13th of June, up until yesterday, from Sunday to Tuesday, the 13th of June, to talk about the way forward. How do we engage in that internal reparations, that curing, that remedy of self? How can we come together as a CARICOM region to help Haiti and its varied stakeholders to come up with indigenous local solutions for the problems that they face, with the support, with the backing, with the assistance, certainly with the solidarity, the diplomatic solidarity, administrative solidarity, technical solidarity of their CARICOM neighbors. I want to quote, paraphrase the former Prime Minister of Jamaica in the Right Honorable Bruce Golding, when he says that we want to have elections soon in IET that are not only free and fair, but free from fear. Free from fear of external, as it were, agents, mercenaries, acting on the behest of former colonial masters to bring about all kinds of problems on the ground. And so I want to laud that input on the part of CARICOM. I want to give a royal salute to them for that very progressive move. And I'm praying them through, and I'm hoping that coming out of these meetings and talks, at least by way of IET, we can see a reversal of those French atrocities, those French crimes against humanity, those French, as it were, dystopic acts that have left in the wake of it humanitarian crisis, health crisis, devastation and poverty unprecedented in IET. Hopefully, we are one step closer to seeing solutions. And I land there.
Brother, let me just say that that when we talk about Haiti, we can't just talk about France. France is one part of a triad of nations.
We concur.
The United States of America and Canada are the other two that are, the chief meddlers in the country in ways that have been since the beginning of the 20th century devastating. Not just beginning of the 20th century, of course, going back to the 19th century, have been devastating to Haiti. And of course, on another program, we could get into those details. But certainly, we must think of always keep Haiti in our thoughts and in our prayers. And certainly, there's always the feeling that CARICOM is not doing enough. And it's left to be seen if our governments, if these steps that you've announced here will bear fruit, and that we will finally stand up for our brothers and sisters in that country that gave birth to the freedom that we enjoy today.
1,000%. 1,000%. I do concur. I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm optimistic because internal reparations are required and needed. I'm optimistic because we are seeing some type of progress. Whether it would bear fruit or not is left to be seen. But we have to hold our various prime ministers and presidents accountable within our various CARICOM nations, and really require them, ask them, agitate, advocate, lobby, so that they can do as much as they can in support of whatever the Haitian stakeholders. And that's the beautiful thing about this particular approach. The Haitian stakeholders will be determining their own fate, their own future, their own destiny. But when they do, they are going to need the hands of CARICOM to rally around them. And so this is not just a time for talk. This is absolutely a time for walk, and our prime ministers and presidents are going to have to walk hand in hand with Haiti to see her restored and recovered. She is, after all, our beacon of liberty within the CARICOM region, and so we owe quite a lot to her.
Yes, and let me just quickly announce here, we are in our last 5 minutes of Indaba tonight, that, emancipation events have begun. And of course, this week on Friday, I'll be at the School for the Deaf. I'll be speaking at the School for the Deaf. And on Saturday, I go down south to be part of the Southern Emancipation Festival. I'm going to introduce, Brother Kwame, a new concept, what I call reactionary emancipation and revolutionary emancipation. And I'm glad you brought up Haiti, because Haiti first went through a revolutionary emancipation, and then it was forced to go through a reactionary emancipation like the rest of us, which is what brought it into poverty and disrepair. And so I'm going to go into much more detail in my lectures over the next couple weeks, starting on Friday, and then on Saturday, and then into the following week. But I'm going to be introducing some new concepts to us this time, and of course,
Go for it.
at the center of it would be the idea that we have two versions of emancipation in our history, and indeed perhaps two versions of independence, and
Absolutely.
that we those two ideas clash, and unfortunately, the reactionary emancipation and the reactionary independence have
One
won
out.
out on both occasions, and so our emancipation and our independence remains unfinished business. That's the thesis, and of course, you want to hear more? Join us in South on Saturday. Find out what the Southern Emancipation Committee has in store. Visit the ESC, call them up, find out what's happening, and come on and see what's happening. Come and be part of that discussion that we're going to raise. Brother Kwame, I think we have 3 minutes left. We have just enough time for closing remarks on tonight's conversation.
Well, I want to start by simply saying that whether we were looking at the business of the erasure of Black history in the American context, whether we were looking at or interrogating and celebrating this amazing drum festival. Remember, it's this Saturday, the 17th, 2 p.m., Yoruba Village, what you would call Independence Square and in its environs, East Port of Spain, a drum festival like none other, as hosted by the Emancipation Support Committee, or whether we were talking about the atrocities that were engaged by France, the ongoing crime scene that is in the continent of Africa and within the diaspora. One thing is central to all of those. The African spirit of resilience and resistance is indeed indomitable and strong. And if we resist as a collective, we have the power, we have the pathos, we certainly have the potency to withstand any kind of, as it will, attack, whether from within or without. The requirement, however, is that we be united. That one of the challenges facing us as a people is under what banner do we unite? As you've said a little while ago, they are the reactionaries, they are the moderates who just want to go along and get along and get along to go along and go along to get along. And they are those revolutionaries who say death or freedom, freedom or death. And so, as a people, we must come together. It's not an option; it's an imperative. And when we do, we would see that there is much more that unites us, and much more advantages and benefits based on that unity than there are, of course, benefits of us remaining in our comfort zone of conformity and convenience. And so I would implore us during this emancipation village celebration, during this Pan-African festival that we are enjoying right now, up until emancipation day and well beyond that. I'm encouraging us really to find out more, to study more, to call the Emancipation Support Committee, to call Brother Shapaka to come and do one of those stirring, riveting lectures. Perhaps you may even call at the office and ask for Reverend Kamau. I've done them before. I'm definitely willing to do them again. But the bottom line is we can't be neutral in this fight. We have to know what we know and know what we don't know. And the only way we can do that is by way of a collective approach where we come together for the greater good of the African community, and I land there.
Yeah, indeed. Just as a closing statement, ideas matter. What we started off that program tonight, you see the amount of effort that's going into state after state to try to remove certain ideas from in front of children because ideas matter. Those of us who, our scholars, people like Dr. Fergus and others, Dr. Tony Martin, Dr. Carol Boyce Davies, etc., we could go on and on and on, going back into the past. The work that they have done, Frantz Fanon, their work matters. And so let us not take their work for granted. Let us make sure we find a way to put those ideas liberation ideas in front of our children. If ideas didn't matter, they wouldn't go to the lengths that they're going to ban books, to shut libraries, to fine people, to imprison people in the United States of America. That's my statement for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'll see you again next week, Wednesday, on another edition of Indaba, the place where knowledge grows, the place to find consensus, the voice of the people, the voice of the Emancipation Support Committee.